Welcome, everyone, to Encounter Grace. We're glad you're with us. I'm Jason McKnight, and I've got with me in the studio here, as always, Ben Hendricks, the inimitable, I don't know what else to call you, Ben.
Wow, that's what
Inimitable.
Just words I don't understand.
I know, I'm
The
like, that's
inimical.
great.
No, not
It's
the
never
inimical.
worked out well for me in the past.
Well, not only Ben, although I'd love to banter with you more, Ben, but we got to bring the rose between two thorns into this. If you're watching, you see Susan in the middle. My
Very
sweet
nice.
wife, Susan McKnight, also Ben's mentor.
Yeah,
No,
right.
I'm kidding. Ben does a lot of mentoring of us, actually, on this very topic of parenting.
This is true.
So you are watching or listening today because you saw the title, The 4 Stages of Parenting, and you wanted to learn a little something. And we want to help. And we want to help by getting Susan talking about some stuff that she has learned over the years. Before we throw it over to Susan, Ben, what do you need to say to frame things better than I have, let's say? What else do you need to say?
I don't think much of anything. I mean, I think this is a much needed topic, and so I'm just excited to be able to talk through it because I think the truth is we never, like as someone who's a new parent, I'm never sure what stage I'm in, and I've only been in one. Like that's all we got. And so we haven't quite had to make a transition yet, but so many of our listeners, you guys as parents, maybe grandparents or just friends of parents, like you're watching students, you're watching kids go through different things. We don't always know that there are stages to it, but that's why I think this is so helpful. I got to be jealous of you guys when you went and you taught on this recently, I think in Wyoming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you came back and I heard it and I got even more jealous. I was like, oh, I should have been there. I should have known that. And so I'm excited. I hope you guys are excited because this is finally going to answer that problem you have.
It's all on you, Susan.
Oh, dear.
But actually, it's 2 parts, and we'll do part 1 on the early part of parenting, part 2 into the teen years. And Ben, actually, that's when we'll leverage Susan and Ben, and I really will just be the talk show host with the 2 experts and helpers here. Not that they've done everything right, but Ben in his ministry with students here at Grace for 7 years has contributed a lot and has helped a lot of kids take steps towards maturity in some of the ways we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So, with all that, part 1, part 2 as an intro, Susan, why are we talking about parenting today, and what are you going to bring to the table?
Well, I'm going to bring experience and a lot of mistakes made and
By
looking
your
back
husband.
and saying, oh, I wish we had done it this way. If the boys heard this
Yeah.
right then and there, they'd say, amen, yes, you have. I also love
We're
to
going
read.
to have them on in part 3.
They get a rebuttal.
There you go. I also have read a lot, and I love what I learn when I read. And I think, wow, I wish I would have done that differently, or maybe there's still time to do this differently. So this really comes out of that. This was something that was really helpful for me. And I think before we talk about the stages of parenting, it is helpful to ask a question like this. What is our aim in parenting? What are we aiming at? Are we aiming at safety for our children? Are we aiming at graduation? Are we aiming just at obedience? A lot of people at this stage in their parenting would say, absolutely, I'm trying to get to obedience.
Yeah, if only we could get there.
Right. Are we aiming at them making us proud? Maybe we're aiming at them just not embarrassing us along the way. So another way to ask that is, what's your win as a parent? Think of life in 20, 25, 30 years. Your kids are grown. They might be married. They might have a family of their own. What do you want? I have a feeling we would all say we want good relationships with our kids, and then with their kids, and as the family grows and changes. So to me, that means we value the relationship the most about our kids. And if the relationship then is the win from that question, what's the win in parenting? If the relationship is the win, how are we constantly working on those relationships now in whatever season of parenting, stage of parenting we're in? How can we learn to relate well and relate better through these changing seasons? So I think it's crucial that we parent with the relationship in mind.
Yeah. Do you think that's like, so this is kind of a weird question right off the bat. Like, do you think that's like kind of the norm to keep the relationship in mind? Or do you think it's just problem solving most of the time when it comes to parenting?
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. I think it is problem solving. I don't know that I thought that way, but if I could rewind the tape, I might say, boy, that's going to be the backdrop of my of this whole parenting thing is the relationship parenting with the relationship in mind?
Yeah.
I think that's a really good question. I mean, I have always prayed for our kids that they would walk with Jesus all the days of their life. That's what a mentor used to pray over me. And I'm like, that's the best thing. That's what I want for them most of all. And I pray different verses for them to that same end. I like how Paul David Tripp says it. It's your job as a parent to win your kids for the way of the Lord. While that sounds beautiful, it's also very daunting and scary. It's my job to win them for the way of the Lord.
Which it isn't win them to the Lord. That's not our job. That's the Holy Spirit's job.
Right. Win them for the way of the Lord.
way of the
like
Lord.
woo them towards the Lord in what we're doing. But the question is, how can we even win our kids for the way of the Lord if our relationship with them is mediocre at best? Why would they be drawn to the way of the Lord if they don't even value our relationship?
I find this such a life-giving idea, and I'm just thinking of it from student ministry and trying to figure out what that looks like for parenting. As you know, I have a 2-year-old and a 3-month-old, and like one of the things that I often wrestle with students is like having the long view in mind.
Yes.
That same is true with parenting, right?
Absolutely.
That one of the things that I often point our leaders to and try to lead us all into is that 9 times out of 10 connections more important than content, because that connection is ultimately sets the ground for the relationship, but also
Absolutely.
the content to be heard
Absolutely.
and
They're
understood.
they're going to be much more open
So
to it. Yeah.
let me ask you this. I mean, because that's a hard thing to do, because a lot of times I just want to get the content across so I can solve the problem. But sometimes I think I can be like overpowering with
Right.
that. And I
Right.
can hurt the relationship.
Right.
How do we navigate that?
Yeah. That's a great question. And interestingly, Kevin Leman, another parenting guy, written a lot of books, he talks about we can parent by power or we can parent by relationship. So maybe we can lead by power or we can lead out of relationship.
Gotcha.
So what is the difference there? Well, you parent by power when your kids are younger in this way. You do this or else you'll get a spanking. Or do that and I'll take your car away once they're 16 years old. But those kids are going to get older. They're going to get bigger than you. They're going to tower over you. One day they'll be out of the house, so you don't have that power anymore. And what do you have left? Well, am I taking advantage of my position as a leader or as a parent to force this authority into their life? Versus, does my relationship with my children or the people I'm leading, does it offer them a humble authority to help motivate them to obey? So is my relationship with that child such that time spent with them in relationship, training them how to obey, time spent with them in relationship, respecting their ideas, their thoughts, their opinions, time spent wooing that child into God's ways, because God's ways are so much better than our ways. That's what parenting by relationship looks like. Yes, you still have to spank or discipline. You might still have to take those car keys away. You're going to have to still do that. I'm not saying there's no, but it's not going to be a power move solely to prove who's in charge here. It's going to be for the sake of their growth, for their maturity, and your relationship's really going to grow through that.
It reminds me, that's what Jesus did.
Yeah.
I mean, with
that's really
humble
true.
authority, he came near. He could have, quote unquote, parented by power,
Right.
but he did by relationship.
Yeah.
And he came and lived with us and
Right.
led us from
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, that's really true.
And I get the tension between doing that though, because again, like even in student ministry, but definitely parenting a 2-year-old, like I feel that tension of it's so much easier to just lead with power
Right,
at times.
right.
And
Oh, yeah.
but in the long haul, it's less fruitful, right?
Exactly.
At least I'm hoping.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
yes,
for sure.
Absolutely.
But if your goal is success or not embarrassing me or, all these things that we talk about, but if your goal is to win them for the way of the Lord, then to follow the way of the Lord and how you parent is going to help them.
Right.
But it's going to be harder on us. It was harder on Jesus.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's
And
exactly right.
and also just thinking of that from the kind of the long game, like, and I heard this from you and read it from several other people as well. Like, pretty much the greatest indicator of a child's success outside of the family is what?
is the relationship
Yeah.
with
With the parent.
with the parents. Mm-hmm.
And the same is true, interestingly enough, with a student or kid's relationship with mom and dad is also an incredible indicator with their walk with the Lord.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's scary too.
Yeah.
To think that I'm helping shape my kids' relationship with God.
I didn't think of it that way.
But one thing that's really helped me learn to parent with a relationship in mind is realizing there's different stages of parenting.
Yeah.
So a lot of different people I've read kind of flesh this out and say, yes, there are definitely different stages, and they all have a different way of doing it. And today I'm just going to share one that I've landed on that I really like. That's helped me understand it. But these 4 stages help provide a framework for that evolving parent-child relationship as our kids grow up and they move from one stage to another. We need to be moving from one stage to another with them.
So the relationship is changing because of the stage that the kids are developing in.
Exactly.
And so we're relating to them.
Exactly. And our role is going to
Yeah.
change.
And we all get that. You cannot reason with a 18-month-old like you can reason with an 18-year-old. So we
Right.
get that. So
Right.
let's get some handles on it and see what are these stages
Yeah.
that could be helpful for us as we're parenting at different ages of our kids. Stages for the ages.
That's beautiful.
This is why they don't let me do marketing.
All right. Well, there's 4 stages of parenting, and we're going to talk about 3 of them over these next 2 podcasts. The first stage is the discipline years that Ben is in the thick of right now. These are the 0 to 5 year
But I'm
olds.
32.
I know. You're in
Your
the
dad's
as
still
a
working on
parent
it.
now. Then there's the training years, and that's ages 5 to 12. Then there's the coaching years, ages 12 to 18. And finally, there's the friendship years, and that's 18 plus. We're not going to really spend much time on that because I have no experience. I mean, we're just at the front end of this.
We're not friends with our kids.
But it's our goal.
Yeah, it
as we
sure is.
as we relate to our kids through all these other stages, we can't wait to have this kind of relationship with our kids that it is more of a friendship for the rest of our lives. So here's what we've already said, but here's what it is. Our children move from one stage to the next without thought or effort. But if we do that as parents, we might crash and burn. We need to give it thought and effort, and we need to consciously adjust our approach to these different seasons. And that's why it's super helpful to know these stages and to think through what happens in each one of them and how our role needs to change in each one.
And it's also encouraging because I think there's a lie with so much in life, but specifically parenting, when it gets difficult, it gets messy, and you're like, are we going to be here forever?
Right, right.
But it's helpful when you were walking me through these, like, oh, I don't always have to be in the discipline years. Like I get to
Right.
look for, I mean, I love the discipline years. They're great. But I'm also excited about the next one and then
Right.
the next one.
Right.
And so that's just a helpful thing to remember.
Yeah.
Like wherever, kind of whatever stage that you happen to be in, like you don't have to be there forever.
That's
It's
true.
hard.
And the great thing is a lot of times God brings a husband and wife together who are better at different seasons, different stages of this parenting thing. Jason was really good in the younger years. I mean, that was his jam. You know, I think I was better. I have been better, maybe not today, in the coaching years or in the teenage years. So, and that's a good thing. We learn from each other, and we can build each other up, and we can rely on each other in those stages. So,
I mean, I know you're better in the coaching years. I'm not sure I was better in the younger years, but
oh, you definitely, I think you were. But
it's very fun.
anyway, let's dive in. Let's talk about the discipline
Let's talk about
years.
the discipline
So
years, 0 to
this is-
5 years old, give or take.
this
preschool.
is where we can really mentor and help Ben. But these are the years, Ben, where you're going to teach so there's good and bad consequences to actions. So you disobey mommy, there's a consequence. You hit your brother with a drumstick, there's a consequence. You obey when I tell you to get ready for bed. Well, there's a consequence there too. You just made mom and dad so happy. You might get to stay up later, or you might just get to enjoy their joy at your obedience. So kids in this age need to learn there's good and bad consequences because that's life.
Right.
And it's a lot easier to teach this in these years than it is in the teen years. So if for no other reason you say, all right, let's teach this now, then it's a lot easier now than it will be when they're teenagers. Just dive in and do it.
And it means you're inviting them into reality
Right.
because there are good and bad consequences to our decisions.
Right.
And if a kid doesn't know that, they're in big trouble in the rest of their lives.
Right. That's exactly right.
Or the sooner the kid knows that, the sooner I learn that,
Yeah.
the better my life goes.
Right. Right.
Flourishing.
Right.
Okay.
I think we have to remember that it's okay, and it's also a good thing to say no to our kids. So I was tempted to kid-proof my house so much that they were totally protected from everything, and I would never have to say no to them. But that's not realistic. That's not life. They need to hear no. They need to learn no, and they need to realize it's a good thing for me. Ultimately, they're going to realize when God says no to them, He's protecting them. He's got their best interest at heart. So they're not going to understand that in these years, but these are the years we begin to teach them these things. And I wonder if parents for the last several years have been afraid or not wanted to say no. They think it's a negative thing. Well, I wonder if that's why we have so many people, so many kids now who have grown up and they're living like, I should get whatever I want, whenever I want. And we've raised entitled kids. So by accident, yes. So I know you can feel probably with your 2.5-year-old like you're saying no all the time. And yes, look for ways to positively reinforce what she's doing.
Yeah.
But it's okay to say no and help them learn through that. We're raising adults. So we always say, I'm raising kids. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. But the reality is we're raising adults. So we want them to grow at the proper time in these different ways to become a fully functioning adult who's able to live life and flourish in it.
Yeah. I mean, well, just as you were talking about that, I was thinking, a couple of years ago, we did that kind of a book review a little bit of The Calling of the American Mind. That great quote of, like, you prepare the child for the road or the road for the child. Like, I don't know, the road is kind of paved with no's. Like
Yeah,
there's so many no's to
absolutely.
life. And so, like, that's such a helpful thing and such a reminder because I'm like, I don't know. Like, there's sometimes it just feels like I'm supposed to parent out of the heart, but it feels like I'm parenting out of the nose.
Right,
Like, you know what I'm saying?
right.
And so, like, that's really encouraging and helpful because I think we all kind of know some of those kids. You probably should have had one more no.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
should-
Or a
Well, and
couple
we've all
dozen.
been them
Yeah.
at
Right.
different times.
Well, that's true.
Now, just because you have to say no, and we as parents in the discipline early stages have to get comfortable saying no, like you said a minute ago, it doesn't mean you're not encouraging them and positively feeding back when they need the praise and the encouragement and the good thing. Also, when you're saying no to something, give them a yes. You know, like when you're training a puppy and he wants to chew your shoes, say no,
Right.
and then give them the toy they can choose.
Right.
Well, same with our kids. If we say, no, you can't play with mommy's phone,
Right.
put in their hands something that they can play with.
Yes.
But here you can. And then it's not you don't have to go around your whole life thinking all I'm doing is being an ogre.
Right. Yeah. I think that's part of why parenting this age kids is so
ogre.
exhausting. An ogre.
It is
That's why
exhausting.
you tune into this podcast.
That's right. For the new words we've come up with.
Don't be an ogre.
Yeah. So one
But
of
it is exhausting because you're always on guard because it's lazy just to say no.
That's
no.
right. That's
That
right.
is lazy parenting.
To get up and to say, no, we don't do that, and redirect
Yeah,
them
that's
into
what we need
what
to
we
do.
can do. But that takes a lot of work, and I can't just lie on the couch when I want to.
But I think that's the nuance that I constantly have to wrestle with. Like, that's the line. Because it's so much easier to just go, no, because I don't want to get off the couch or I don't want to have to go do that thing. No, we don't do that. Well, no, we could, but I don't want to. But one of the things that's helped to me is going, like, I'm trying to help raise my kids, and I've only done this for 2 years now. But we also do it in student ministry, is like helping them be quicker and better obeyers.
Yes. Yep.
And like
Yep.
jump into obedience a little faster
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of times they don't want to. I don't want to,
Right.
but it's like over time it becomes almost like a habit. Like
Right, right.
It does feel like you can train obedience in a way,
Right.
and that feels weird to say, but I think obedience becomes a habit. I mean,
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
yeah.
And that's what we want to do in this season is help strengthen our kids, their obedience muscle. So
Okay.
you're doing this multiple reps when you're working out or whatever, trying to strengthen your muscles. Well, that's what we're doing with them is we're helping them train that obedience muscle through multiple reps, through appropriate consequences. We want them to learn while the stakes are low, right?
Yeah, that's
And
the
that
truth.
is
That is
in the
truth.
home. The older they get, the more severe those consequences will be. So somebody's going to discipline your child. Don't you want it to be you? I'd rather it be me than my teacher, my kids' teachers. I want them to learn how to obey so they can be a blessing to their teachers. It could be a cop who has to discipline them. It could ultimately be a judge who has to. I'd rather it be me and help them learn from the get-go. So you might think it's not a big deal for a 2-year-old not to obey me when I tell them, go change your clothes. I don't even know if they can do that at 2 yet, but go get ready for bed. Go brush your teeth. Whatever you can let them do. You might think it's not that big of a deal, but if you
I'm going to
fast,
fight. I'm going to choose my battle, is
But
what we always say,
right.
so I can stay on the couch.
right. But if you fast forward that to when they're 16, a cop isn't going to think it's no big deal when they pull over your child for going 90 and a 60. You know, there's consequences to actions. That's life.
Yeah.
We're preparing them to be adults, so we need to help them learn.
Well, and so Janessa and I ripped this off of somebody, so we didn't come up with it. That's why I think it's pretty good. We just kind of decided a good while ago that if we ask one of our kids to do something, like it's gonna get done because it's so much easier to just go do it yourself.
Yeah.
But sometimes we're asking something that's pretty hard, or maybe they don't understand, but we still want to help them obey.
Right.
Because we asked you to do it. And so we kind of have this line of like, hey, mommy or daddy, we're going to help you obey.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so sometimes it's like, hey, you put those dishes away, the plastic dishes, everybody. And sometimes my sweet angel daughter will look at me and go, no. She would never, though. But so we're like, mommy and dad are going to help you obey. And we'll kind of put our hands on her hands and we'll pick the things up and we go through it because we're training the muscle. I love that. It's a great illustration.
Yeah.
It's helpful because over
That's right.
time it's like, oh, you don't need us. That's right.
Right.
So this is super helpful. Thank you so much for that.
Well, I think somebody I read said this that was really helpful because you could be saying no for everything all the time. And how do you kind of narrow it down and say, how do we decide on what we're going to discipline on?
Yeah.
And I thought this was great. She said, well, what we're calling our kids to is obedience, honesty, and respect. So that means they will be disciplined for dishonesty, disobedience, and disrespect. Well, that makes it much easier because, you know, your 3-year-old might have gotten a drum set from grandma and they're down in their room beating it to death and it's bugging you. And so you could go down there and yank them off that and, you know, tell them not to do that. Or you could stop and think, okay, they're allowed to do this now. They're not disobeying me by playing, unless it's midnight. You know, they're not being dishonest. They're not being disrespectful. So I can let that one go. But when it comes to those 3 things, I think that's really helpful.
Really good.
I know when we were new at Grace, we were also new parents. And what a blessing it was to watch so many different families who were a little bit further along than us, watch how they did this and their wins with their kids, as well as learning from their mistakes. I think it's really important to be in a community where you can ask actual people and not just Google, how do I do this? Because these friends of yours are going to know your kid as well and be able to speak into it more deeply. But one of the things that we learned from these friends a little further along from us was teaching your kids to obey and teaching them this little phrase to say so that they would keep these 3 things in their mind. So what does it mean to obey? How do we obey? We obey all the way, right away, and with a happy heart.
Is that why we start all of our staff meetings saying that?
We do. We do. So we obey all the way, right away, and with a happy heart. Well, why? Why do we want those 3 things? Well, the bottom line is we want to train our kids to be able to respond to God, ultimately. And He's put us in their lives as their parents to be the first pointer to Him and to show them this is what humble authority, loving authority looks like. And you are always going to have an authority figure in your life. Even when you grow up, it's God. And this is how ultimately I want to respond to God all the way whenever He calls me to do something, right away, and with a happy heart. So when we don't help our kids learn to obey all the way, right away with a happy heart, what happens? Well, I just read this recently. I thought it was really good. They said, here's what happens. Our kids come to believe I'm in control of the big people. If I don't really want to do something, I don't have to. And if I ignore them, they'll go away. They'll stop asking. And that is a self-absorbed child. So the discipline years are very exhausting. It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. I mean, what we're going to do is we're going to press pause here, shift into another podcast episode, but we want to summarize this discipline time, these first few years. If the goal of parenting is relationships with our kids so that we can win them for the way of the Lord, if that's the goal, then how do we relate to our kids when they're early newborns, toddlers, preschoolers, so that they can get it? Again, if I use the high school reasoning with them at 2, it's not the same. They don't have that same level. So what is it? Oh, it's steering them into the right path with loving correction, with consequences that are real, showing them there's a good and a bad outcome, helping them understand that by how we do it, coming alongside them in obeying the right. Yes, we're going to teach them their obedience muscle all the way, right away, with a happy heart, first-time obedience. Because, man, when they're little, you don't want them running out in the street. And if you have to bribe them and wait till I count to 3 before they obey, then they're going to be run over by the truck. We got to get that. But as we lean into this, and as we as parents say, okay, if these are the discipline years, how can I do that with as much grace and truth from the Lord so that their relationship with me and their character can be formed? I mean, I think this is super, super helpful. And actually, I think though we said it's going to be 2 podcast episodes, to do it in 3 means now I can go back and listen to this one again and again because I've got a 2-year-old and I haven't known what to do. And now I don't have to wade through the other seasons. I can just do this again. Susan, thank you for helping us along this time. Ben, thank you for your great firsthand comments from Life with Harper and Hudson. I love it. There's just wealth here. And everybody, thanks for joining in. Tune in for the training years that are coming up next. And then after that, in high school, we'll talk about those on part 3.